Amara threaded her way through the bustling market, her small frame weaving effortlessly between shoppers laden with sacks of vegetables, baskets of bread, and trays of fresh fish. The air was thick with the scent of ripe fruit, sizzling street food, and a faint undertone of damp earth. It was a place of sensory overload, and Amara usually loved it. The vibrant colors of the stalls, the loud banter of vendors, the infectious energy of the crowd. But today, something tugged at her attention. She first noticed the dog when she paused to tie her shoelace near the edge of the marketplace. His presence was subtle, almost ghost-like, in a dim corner beneath a wooden stall displaying secondhand goods. He was chained to a metal post, the chain so short that he could barely move more than a few inches in any direction. His fur, once probably a handsome shade of black or brown, was now a patchy, matted mess of dirt and knots. His ribs jutted out beneath the thin, dirty coat, and his head hung low, resting limply on his front paws. Amara crouched, squinting to see him more clearly. The dog's eyes, half shut and dulled with misery, briefly flicked toward her. It wasn't curiosity or fear that filled them, but a profound, heavy emptiness that hit Amara like a physical blow. He didn't bark, growl, or move. He simply stared for a moment before returning his gaze to the ground. "Poor thing," she murmured to herself, her chest tightening. She turned to the man sitting near the stall, a grizzled vendor with a cigar perched on his lip and a disinterested scowl etched into his face. "Excuse me," she said, mustering her courage. "Is that your dog?" The man grunted. Not even looking up from the newspaper, he was lazily flipping through. "Yeah, if you can call it that. Thing's more trouble than it's worth." Amara frowned. "Why is he chained up like that?" The man finally looked at her, his expression a mixture of annoyance and indifference. "Because he's useless. Won't eat, won't play, won't even bark. Just sits there. Figured someone might want him for scraps or something, but no one cares. He's been here for weeks." Amara's stomach churned. She glanced back at the dog, who hadn't moved. The chain around his neck looked too tight, leaving an angry red mark on his skin. "He's not useless," she said, a hint of defiance creeping into her voice. "He's just sad." The man snorted. "Sad? You're too soft, kid. That much done for. If you want him, take him. Saves me the trouble of putting him down." Amara's eyes widened. "Put him down?" she echoed, her voice rising with alarm. The idea of this creature, this living, breathing soul, being discarded like trash made her heart race with anger and fear. The man shrugged. "What else am I going to do? No one wants him." Amara's mind whirled. She didn't have a plan. She didn't know if her parents would allow her to keep a dog, let alone one in such a condition. But she couldn't leave him here. Not like this. "I'll take him," she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Her voice trembled, but her resolve was clear. The vendor raised an eyebrow, then shrugged again as if her decision meant nothing to him. He reached for the chain and handed it to her. "He's all yours. Don't come crying back if he drops dead in a day or two." Amara barely heard him. Her focus was entirely on the dog. She crouched in front of him, holding the chain loosely in her hands. "Hey there," she whispered softly. "It's okay now. I'm going to take you home." The dog didn't react at first. His head remained on his paws, and his body didn't budge. Amara felt a pang of doubt. Maybe the man was right. Maybe the dog had given up completely. But then, as she stayed crouched there, speaking to him in soothing tones, she noticed a faint twitch of his ears. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was something. Encouraged, she tugged gently on the chain. "Come on, boy. Let's get you out of here." The dog hesitated, his body stiff, as if it had forgotten how to move. Slowly, painfully, he pushed himself to his feet. His legs wobbled, and for a moment, Amara thought he might collapse. But he steadied himself, taking a tentative step forward. His eyes met hers again, and for the briefest moment, she thought she saw a flicker of something in their depths. Hope? Curiosity? She couldn't be sure, but it was enough to make her heart swell. The walk home was slow and awkward. The dog, whom she decided to call Shadow, stumbled frequently, his legs clearly weak from disuse. Amara kept the pace gentle, speaking to him the entire time, even though she wasn't sure he understood. "You're going to like it at my place," she said, her voice filled with a determination that surprised even herself. "It's not big, but it's warm and safe. And I promise, no one will ever hurt you again." When they finally reached her house, Shadow hesitated at the gate. Amara knelt beside him, scratching lightly behind his ears. "It's okay," she whispered. "You're home now." For the first time, Shadow lifted his head slightly, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air. Amara opened the gate and led him inside, her heart pounding with a mix of excitement and nerves. She didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was certain: Shadow's life, and maybe hers too, was about to change forever. The first night with Shadow was harder than Amara had anticipated. After leading him into the backyard, she set up a makeshift bed for him using an old blanket and a small cushion. She placed it under the porch where he could be shielded from the night's chill. Shadow didn't resist as she gently guided him to the spot, but he immediately curled into a tight ball, his body trembling slightly. Amara sat a few feet away, not wanting to overwhelm him. "You're safe now," she said softly, though she wasn't sure if Shadow understood. His eyes remained distant, staring blankly into the darkness. Inside the house, her parents weren't thrilled. Her mother leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed, her brow furrowed with concern. "Amara, we've talked about this. A pet is a big responsibility, and that dog, he's not in good shape. Are you sure you can handle this?" Her father chimed in, his voice less critical, but still hesitant. "It's not just about feeding him. That dog looks like he's been through a lot. It's going to take time, effort, and money to care for him properly." "I can do it," Amara insisted, her voice unwavering. "I'll take care of him. I'll feed him, walk him, and make sure he's okay. He deserves a chance." Her parents exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between them. Finally, her mother sighed. "Okay, but this is your responsibility. If it gets to be too much, we'll have to reconsider." Amara nodded eagerly. "I promise." "Thank you." That night, she barely slept. She kept peeking out her bedroom window, watching Shadow through the glass. He remained in the same curled-up position under the porch, his chest rising and falling slowly. She wished she could do more for him, but she knew she had to be patient. Trust wasn't something she could demand. It had to be earned. The next morning, Amara woke early, excitement and nervousness bubbling in her chest. She hurried outside with a small bowl of water and a piece of toast. Shadow lifted his head slightly as she approached, but didn't move otherwise. She crouched a few feet away, setting the bowl and bread on the ground. "Here you go," she said gently. "It's not much, but we'll get something better soon." Shadow sniffed the air, but didn't make a move toward the food. Amara's heart sank. She remembered what the vendor had said about him, refusing to eat. "Please, Shadow," she whispered. "You have to try." She sat there for nearly an hour, watching and waiting. Eventually, Shadow stretched his neck forward and took a tentative nibble of the bread. Amara held her breath, not wanting to startle him. He ate slowly, cautiously, but when he finished, she felt an immense wave of relief. It was a small victory, but it meant the world to her. Over the next few days, Amara devoted every spare moment to Shadow. She researched dog care online, reading articles, and watching videos about how to help a traumatized animal recover. She learned that Shadow's trembling might be a sign of fear or anxiety, and that building trust would take time. She started with small steps. Every morning, she would sit near him, talking softly about anything and everything: her school, her friends, her favorite books. She avoided sudden movements, keeping her voice calm and steady. She brought him bits of roasted chicken, a treat she'd read could entice even the most reluctant eater. The first time Shadow accepted a piece of chicken from her hand, Amara felt tears sting her eyes. It was the first sign that he was beginning to trust her. But progress wasn't linear. There were days when Shadow would retreat into himself, refusing food or flinching at the slightest noise. On one particularly bad day, a car backfired on the street outside, and Shadow bolted to the farthest corner of the yard, pressing himself against the fence. Amara spent hours sitting nearby, waiting for him to calm down. She didn't try to touch him or coax him out. She just stayed there, letting him know he wasn't alone. At school, Amara found herself distracted, her thoughts constantly drifting to Shadow. Her friends teased her about being so preoccupied, but she didn't care. She even started skipping her usual after-school hangouts, rushing home instead to spend more time with him. Slowly but surely, Shadow began to change. His once stiff, lethargic movements became more fluid, and he started exploring the yard with cautious curiosity. He still flinched at sudden noises, but he no longer froze in terror. Amara noticed his tail wag slightly one afternoon when she brought him a new toy, a simple rubber ball she'd bought with her allowance. The first time Shadow played with the ball, it was as if a switch had flipped. Amara tossed it gently across the yard, and to her astonishment, Shadow trotted after it. He didn't pick it up, but he nosed it tentatively, pushing it a few feet before glancing back at her. Amara clapped her hands in delight, her laughter echoing in the yard. "Good boy, Shadow. You're amazing." That moment marked a turning point. Shadow began seeking her out more often, following her around the yard, and even nudging her hand for pets. His once dull eyes gained a sparkle, and his tail wagged more frequently, though still hesitantly, as if he was relearning how to express happiness. One evening, as Amara sat on the porch reading a book, Shadow surprised her by resting his head on her lap. She froze, afraid to move and scare him away, but when she glanced down, his eyes met hers, filled with a quiet, tentative trust. "You're really starting to believe in us, huh?" she whispered, stroking his head gently. Shadow closed his eyes, a soft sigh escaping him. Amara smiled, her heart swelling with pride and affection. It wasn't perfect, and there were still challenges to overcome, but for the first time, Amara felt like they were truly on the path to healing, together. The storm rolled in quickly, the sky darkening as heavy clouds gathered overhead. Amara had been at her grandmother's bakery after school, helping to package loaves of bread for the evening rush. She hadn't noticed the ominous shift in the weather until the first crack of thunder echoed through the town. "Looks like you'd better get home, sweetheart," her grandmother said, glancing toward the window where rain had begun to patter against the glass. "Storm's coming in strong?" Amara nodded, wrapping her coat tightly around herself. Shadow, who had recently begun accompanying her on short walks, was waiting just outside the bakery, tethered to a post where Amara always tied him up. She hurried out, wincing as the cold raindrops hit her face. Shadow looked up as she approached. His body was tense, and his ears flattened against his head at the sound of distant thunder. "Hey boy," she said soothingly, untying the leash. "Don't worry, we'll be home soon." They started walking, Amara keeping a firm but gentle hold on the leash. The streets were nearly empty, most people having hurried indoors to escape the rain. The occasional flash of lightning lit up the sky, followed by deep rumbles of thunder that made Shadow flinch. Amara stopped frequently to reassure him, crouching down to stroke his fur and whisper calming words. They were halfway home when it happened. A loud crack of thunder boomed directly overhead, startling both Amara and Shadow. Shadow froze, his legs trembling, his body lowering instinctively as if trying to make himself invisible. Amara knelt beside him, wrapping her arms around his neck. "It's okay, Shadow. I've got you." She was so focused on calming him that she didn't notice the little boy darting into the street a few yards ahead. He couldn't have been more than 6 or 7, chasing after a bright red ball that had escaped his grasp. Amara's head jerked up as she heard the squeal of tires. A car careened around the corner, its driver slamming on the brakes as the boy froze in the middle of the road, wide-eyed and terrified. "Stop!" Amara screamed, but her voice was drowned out by the rain and thunder. Before she could react, Shadow sprang into action. He tore free from her grasp, his leash slipping from her hand as he bolted toward the boy. Amara's heart lurched in fear as she watched him sprint into the street, barking loudly and ferociously. The car swerved sharply, the tires screeching against the wet pavement. Shadow reached the boy just in time, nudging him forcefully with his shoulder and hurting him out of the car's path. The car skidded to a stop, its bumper mere inches from Shadow. Amara's breath caught in her throat as she saw Shadow standing in the middle of the road, his body braced and his eyes locked on the car. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The rain, the noise, even time itself. Then, Shadow turned and trotted back to the boy, nudging him again, this time toward the safety of the sidewalk. The boy's mother came running, her face pale and stricken. She scooped up her son, clutching him tightly as tears streamed down her face. "Thank you," she sobbed, looking at Amara, then at Shadow. "Thank you both." Amara rushed forward, dropping to her knees and wrapping her arms around Shadow's neck. He was soaked to the bone, his fur plastered against his skin, but his tail wagged weakly as he leaned into her embrace. "You're incredible," she whispered, her voice shaking. "You saved him." The boy, still clinging to his mother, reached out a small hand toward Shadow. "Doggy," he said softly, his voice trembling but filled with awe. Shadow stepped forward, his movements cautious, and licked the boy's hand once. It was a simple gesture, but it brought a fresh wave of tears to the mother's eyes. The rest of the walk home was a blur. News of the incident spread quickly, thanks to a bystander who had witnessed everything and captured part of it on their phone. By the time Amara and Shadow reached their front door, her parents were already waiting, having heard about the event through a neighbor. "Amara, what happened?" her father asked, his voice tinged with both worry and pride. Amara recounted the story, her words tumbling out in a rush as she patted Shadow's head, unable to stop smiling. Her parents listened, their expressions shifting from concern to amazement. "That's incredible," her mother said finally, kneeling down to stroke Shadow's damp fur. "He's a hero." The days that followed were filled with unexpected attention. The video of Shadow's rescue went viral in the local community, and soon reporters were calling, wanting to interview Amara and Shadow. A journalist from the town's newspaper came to their home, snapping pictures of Shadow and writing a feature story about the dog who had once been discarded and labeled as useless. Shadow handled the attention with surprising grace. He sat calmly beside Amara during interviews, his tail wagging slightly whenever someone praised him. Amara couldn't have been prouder. "He's not just my dog," she told the reporter during one interview. "He's my best friend, and he's proof that every life matters, no matter how broken it might seem." Shadow's act of bravery also sparked a wave of kindness in the community. People began reaching out to Amara, offering to donate food and supplies for Shadow. Some even asked if she could help them adopt other neglected animals. Amara realized that Shadow's story had inspired others to see the value in giving second chances, and that realization filled her with a sense of purpose she'd never felt before. One evening, as Amara sat on the porch with Shadow curled up at her feet, she reflected on how far they had come. From the forgotten corner of the market to becoming a local hero, Shadow's journey had been nothing short of miraculous. But what amazed her most wasn't just his transformation, it was how much he had transformed her life as well. Shadow had taught her about resilience, love, and the power of believing in something, even when no one else does. As the stars began to peek through the now clear sky, Amara leaned down and kissed Shadow's head. "You saved him," she said softly. "And you saved me too." Shadow looked up at her, his eyes bright and full of trust, as if to say, "I know." Life after Shadow's heroic act felt like a whirlwind. The local newspaper story brought attention to Shadow and Amara in ways she hadn't anticipated. Neighbors who once barely acknowledged her now stopped by the house, eager to meet the dog who had saved a young boy's life. Shadow handled the attention with quiet dignity, as if he somehow understood the weight of his actions. But for Amara, the change wasn't just external. Something had shifted inside her as well. Shadow's journey from a neglected market dog to a beloved companion and local hero inspired her in ways she couldn't have imagined. She began thinking about other animals like him, those who had been discarded or ignored, left to fend for themselves without hope of a better life. One day, while sitting in the yard with Shadow, an idea struck her. She watched as he trotted across the grass, his steps more confident now, his tail wagging as he chased after a ball she'd thrown. "What if we could help more dogs like you?" she mused aloud, scratching his head when he brought the ball back to her. The idea grew in her mind over the following weeks. Amara began researching animal rescues online, reading stories about people who had started shelters or foster programs. She realized she didn't have the resources to start something that big, but perhaps she could do something smaller, something within her means. She started with a simple poster. Using her allowance money, she bought art supplies and created colorful signs that read, "Give a second chance. Help neglected animals in our community." Below the title, she added a picture of Shadow, his soulful eyes and wagging tail captured perfectly in a photo her mother had taken. She included her contact information and a short description of her plan to collect supplies and find homes for animals in need. Amara hung the posters around the neighborhood and handed them out at the market where she had first found Shadow. The response was immediate. People began reaching out, some offering bags of dog food, old blankets, and toys, while others inquired about adopting strays they had seen around town. One elderly man even donated a small sum of money, saying, "Your dog's story touched my heart. Keep up the good work." With her parents' support, Amara turned their backyard into a temporary sanctuary for a handful of animals. Shadow, now the undisputed leader of the pack, seemed to take his new role seriously. He greeted every new arrival with a wag of his tail and a gentle nuzzle, as if assuring them they were safe now. Among the first animals Amara took in were two skinny puppies she found shivering behind a dumpster and an older cat with a limp that a neighbor had spotted wandering the streets. Caring for them wasn't easy. There were vet visits, late-night feedings, and moments of frustration when the animals refused to eat or trust her. But Amara's determination never wavered. She saw a little of Shadow in each of them, and that was enough to keep her going. As weeks turned into months, Amara's initiative began to gain momentum. A local veterinarian heard about her efforts and offered to provide discounted services for the animals she rescued. The town's pet supply store donated food and supplies. Even her classmates got involved, helping to walk the animals or spread the word about adoption opportunities. One day, Amara received an unexpected call from the family of the boy Shadow had saved. They had heard about her rescue efforts and wanted to help. "We can't thank you and Shadow enough for what you did," the boy's mother said over the phone. "If there's anything we can do, let us know." Amara hesitated for a moment, then said, "Actually, there is something. Could you help me organize an adoption event? I want to find forever homes for some of the animals." The woman agreed enthusiastically, and within a week, plans were underway for a community event at the local park. Flyers went up around town, advertising a day of fun with food stalls, games, and a chance to meet adoptable animals. Amara worked tirelessly to prepare, enlisting her friends to help groom and socialize the animals so they'd make a good impression. The day of the event dawned bright and sunny. Amara arrived early with her family and a group of volunteers, setting up booths and pens for the animals. Shadow sat proudly at her side, wearing a bandana that read "Rescue Hero" in bold letters. He seemed to thrive on the excitement, his tail wagging nonstop as people came by to pet him and hear his story. By midday, the park was bustling with activity. Families wandered from booth to booth, children laughing as they played games or fed treats to the animals. One by one, the animals found new homes. The two puppies went to a family with a large backyard, and the older cat was adopted by a retired couple who promised to spoil her with affection. As the event drew to a close, Amara sat under a tree with Shadow, watching as the last of the animals were loaded into cars by their new families. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing she had made a difference. But her work wasn't done. That evening, as she and Shadow sat together on the porch, she thought about the future. "We've come so far," she said, scratching his ears. "But there are still so many animals out there who need help." Shadow looked up at her, his eyes filled with trust and understanding. He leaned against her, his weight a comforting presence. Amara smiled, knowing that with Shadow by her side, she could take on anything. Over time, Amara's small backyard rescue grew into something larger. The local community rallied around her efforts, helping to build a proper shelter and expand her reach. Shadow became the heart of the operation, his story inspiring others to believe in second chances. And while the work was never easy, it was always worth it. Every wagging tail, every happy adoption, and every life saved was a testament to the journey they had started together. the girl who had rescued a broken dog, and the dog who had rescued her right back.